My husband stood in our marble foyer, laughing while his mistress mocked me on speakerphone. He said I was nothing, just another expense. When I threatened to leave, he smirked and asked if I thought he was scared. That was his first mistake. His second, forgetting I built his empire. Before I tell you how a cheating husband lost everything he thought was his, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't believe how this story ends, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happened when the truth came out. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. They say you never really know someone until you see who they become when they think they've won. I learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible. Standing in a house I paid for, listening to a man I built up tear me down like I was nothing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back when I actually believed in happily ever after. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I'm a 38-year-old black woman who clawed her way out of poverty, put myself through college, working 3 jobs, and graduated top of my class with a finance degree. I met Trevor when I was 26, working as a junior analyst at an investment firm. He walked into my office with wild eyes and a dream about revolutionizing cloud storage technology. He had passion and ideas, but no money and no clue how to structure a business. I saw potential where everyone else saw risk. We fell in love over spreadsheets and business plans. I helped him build his pitch deck, introduced him to investors from my network, and when he needed startup capital, I wrote him a check for $150,000. That was every penny I had saved, every sacrifice I'd made since I was 16 years old. My mama called me crazy. My friends said I was being used. But I believed in him. More than that, I believed in us. We got married 2 years later, right when the company started taking off. I left my job to become his chief financial officer because the company needed someone who understood both the money and the vision. I wasn't just a supportive wife cheering from the sidelines. I was in the trenches, structuring deals, managing cash flow, and keeping us afloat when things got rough. I even wrote the code for the first version of our main product because Trevor's developer quit and we couldn't afford to hire another one. I taught myself programming in 3 weeks. That's the kind of woman I am. When something needs to get done, I figure it out. For 12 years, we built something incredible together. The company grew from a garage startup to a multi-million-dollar corporation. We bought the mansion in Connecticut, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, the luxury cars. From the outside, we looked like the American dream come true. A power couple, Black excellence personified, magazine covers, and conference keynote speeches. But somewhere along the way, Trevor started believing his own press. He started forgetting who held the ladder while he climbed. It started small, like it always does. Late nights at the office that turned into overnight stays at hotels, business trips where he'd turn his phone off for hours, passwords changing on accounts we used to share. I noticed, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Successful men work hard, right? He's just stressed. He's just busy. I made excuses because the alternative was too painful to consider. Then about 6 months ago, something shifted. Trevor started looking at me differently, like I was a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. Conversations became transactional. He stopped asking about my day. When I'd talk about the business, he'd cut me off or check his phone. Our friends started giving me those pitying looks. The ones that say they know something you don't. One of my girlfriends pulled me aside at a charity gala and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said we were fine. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I did what any woman with resources would do. I hired a private investigator. 3 weeks later, I had a folder full of photos, hotel receipts, and timestamps. Her name was Brittany, 27 years old, long blonde hair, worked in our marketing department. She'd been with the company for 8 months. The affair had been going on for 6. The investigator's report was thorough and devastating. Romantic dinners at restaurants we used to go to. Weekend getaways to hotels where we'd celebrated anniversaries. He was rewriting our history with someone else. I sat with that information for 2 weeks, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to scream and throw things. Part of me wanted to fall apart. But the businesswoman in me, the part that had survived poverty and racism, and every obstacle thrown my way, that part said to wait, to watch, to gather more information. So I did. That's when I started really looking at the company finances. I was the CFO, so I had access to everything. But I'd been trusting Trevor to handle certain accounts. Big mistake. I found offshore accounts I didn't know about. Money being moved in ways that didn't make sense. He was hiding assets, preparing for something. The numbers told a story, and that story was that Trevor was planning a future that didn't include me. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7 o'clock. I was in the kitchen of our mansion, pretending to care about the dinner I was making, when I heard Trevor's car in the driveway. I walked to the foyer to meet him, and that's when I heard it. Her voice, Brittany's voice, coming from his phone on speaker. He didn't realize it was on speaker, or maybe he didn't care anymore. She was laughing, that high-pitched giggle that made my stomach turn. And she said, "I still can't believe you're stuck in that house with her tonight. That old woman must be so boring. She's what, like your mother's age?" Trevor laughed, actually laughed, and he said, "She's not that old, but yeah, it's not exactly exciting. But don't worry, baby. She's just a checkbook at this point. Once I figure out the financial stuff, we're done." I stood there, frozen, in the marble foyer that I'd chosen, paid for with money I'd helped earn, listening to my husband reduce me to a bank account. Brittany kept going. I mean, what does she even do all day? It's not like she's important to the company anymore. You're the CEO. You're the genius. She's just riding your coattails. And Trevor, my husband of 12 years, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, said, "Exactly. She's replaceable." That word echoed in my head. Replaceable. I stepped into the foyer where he could see me. The look on his face when he realized I'd heard everything? I'll never forget it. But it wasn't shame. It was annoyance. Like I'd interrupted something. He ended the call quickly, and for a moment we just stared at each other. I said, "I know everything, Trevor. The affair. The hidden accounts. All of it." I expected panic, maybe denial. Instead, he loosened his tie and shrugged. "So what? What are you going to do about it?" The coldness in his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard from him before. This wasn't the man I married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. I told him I wanted a divorce. I told him this was over. And you know what he did? He laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed like I'd told the funniest joke in the world. Then he stepped closer to me, and his face changed. It became hard, mean. He said, "You think I'm scared of you leaving? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? This house, mine. The company, mine. The lifestyle you love so much, all mine. You're nothing without me." He started listing all the reasons I should be grateful he married me in the first place. How he gave me a life I could never have achieved on my own. How I should thank him for pulling me up from wherever I came from. He threw my background in my face, like it was something shameful. He said I was getting older, gaining weight, becoming irrelevant. He said I should be happy with whatever scraps he was willing to give me, because no one else would want me anyway. Then he brought up the prenup. "Remember that prenup you signed, sweetheart? That protects me. You walk away with whatever I decide to give you. And based on how you've been acting lately, that's not going to be much." He was so smug, so confident. He really thought he had all the power. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at him and said, "You should have read that prenup more carefully." His smile faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. "Whatever, go ahead and try. My lawyers will bury you." Then he walked past me, went upstairs to pack a bag, and left to spend the night at some hotel with her. I stood in that foyer for a long time after he left. Not because I was heartbroken, but because I was planning. Here's what Trevor didn't know. That prenup he was so confident about, I drafted it 12 years ago, When we had nothing but dreams and debt, I wrote that prenup to protect both of us fairly. Trevor never read it carefully. He just signed it, trusting me to handle the legal stuff, like I handled everything else. And in that prenup, there were clauses, beautiful, ironclad clauses, about infidelity, hidden assets, and the definition of marital property. But more importantly, that prenup recognized me as a co-founder of the company, not just an employee. See, when we started that business, Trevor needed my investment to get off the ground. He also needed my financial expertise, my network, my credibility. So we structured the company with both our names on the founding documents. I owned 40% initially, but over the years, as I brought in major clients and structured deals that made us millions, that percentage grew. Legal documents don't lie, and I had every single one of them organized in a safe deposit box Trevor didn't know about. I spent the next week gathering evidence. As CFO, I had access to every account, every contract, every email. I documented everything. The offshore accounts he'd opened in the Cayman Islands, the money he'd been moving around to hide assets, the expense reports that showed his affair, company money spent on hotels, and gifts for Brittany. I also pulled up all the deals I'd personally structured, complete with emails showing my work product, my strategy, my financial models. I gathered proof of every major contribution I'd made to the company's success. Then I called my attorney, Linda. She's a shark in the courtroom, specializes in high net worth divorces. When I laid out everything I had, she actually smiled. He has no idea what's about to hit him, does he? I told her that Trevor thought the prenup protected him. She laughed and said, well, he's about to get a very expensive education. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to board members, the ones who'd watched me work for 12 years. I had coffee with investors who knew that I was the financial brain behind Trevor's vision. I didn't badmouth Trevor or reveal the divorce yet. I just reminded them of my contributions, my track record, my value. I planted seeds. I also discovered something interesting. Brittany was pregnant. Trevor had promised to marry her, even showed her house designs for a bigger mansion. He was planning to replace me entirely. Thought he'd just swap out one wife for a newer model, like trading in a car. He'd been telling Brittany that I was worthless, that the divorce would be simple, and that they'd be living in luxury within months. On a Monday morning, 3 weeks after that night in the foyer, I filed for divorce. The papers were served to Trevor at the office, right before a board meeting. I made sure it was public, professional, and humiliating. The filing outlined everything: my claims as co-founder, my equity stake, the hidden assets, the infidelity clause in the prenup, and a detailed accounting of every contribution I'd made to the company's success. Trevor called me within an hour, absolutely losing his mind. You can't do this. You're going to destroy everything we built. I let him yell himself out. Then I said very calmly, no, Trevor. I'm going to take what I built. There's a difference. He threatened lawyers, audits, scorched earth. I reminded him that I had better lawyers, and that every audit would just expose more of his shady financial moves. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and negotiations. The company board called an emergency session to review the situation. They went through every document I provided. They saw the founding papers with my name on them. They reviewed the deals I'd structured that had made the company profitable. They looked at the emails proving I'd brought in our 3 biggest clients. They examined the financial irregularities in Trevor's hidden accounts. Then the IRS got involved. Someone, and I'm not saying who, sent them an anonymous tip about those offshore accounts and questionable tax reporting. Suddenly, Trevor wasn't just fighting a divorce. He was fighting federal investigators. His legal bills started piling up, and the company's reputation took a hit. The investors started jumping ship from Trevor's side to mine. They'd always known I was the financial genius in the partnership. Trevor was the face and the vision, but I was the one who made the vision profitable. When it came time to choose, they chose the person who actually understood how money worked. Brittany found out that Trevor was about to be broke. All his promises of luxury and mansions disappeared when she realized the money was tied up in legal battles and that most of the assets were actually mine. She left him before the ink dried on the divorce filing. Married some doctor 3 months later. Trevor tried to call me, crying, asking me to stop the proceedings. He said we could work it out, go to counseling, start over. I told him he should have thought about that before he called me replaceable. The final settlement took 6 months to finalize. The court recognized me as co-founder based on the original documents and my contributions. The prenup held up perfectly, especially the infidelity clauses. In the end, I walked away with 60% of the company, valued at $200 million. I got the Connecticut house and the Martha's Vineyard property. I got my original $150,000 investment back with 25% annual interest compounded over 12 years. When you added it all up, I walked away with $320 million in assets. Trevor kept 40% of the company, but he lost his CEO position because the board didn't trust him anymore. He was drowning in legal fees from the IRS investigation and had to sell most of his remaining shares just to pay his lawyers. Last I heard, he's living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Newark, working as a consultant for someone else's company. Brittany's married with a baby, and Trevor sees those photos on social media of the life he could have had if he'd just been faithful. As for me, I'm running my portion of the company, and it's thriving. I've started mentoring young Black women in business, teaching them about protecting themselves legally and knowing their worth financially. I bought my mama a house in Florida. I travel when I want. I sleep peacefully at night. The money is nice, I won't lie about that. $320 million provides a comfortable life. But you know what's better than the money? The freedom, the peace, the knowledge that I never have to settle for being called nothing ever again. Looking back, I don't even feel angry anymore. Trevor taught me a valuable lesson about knowing your worth and protecting yourself. I learned that love is beautiful, but documents are forever. I learned that your name on founding papers matters. I learned that the person who underestimates you will always be shocked when you win. Trevor thought he was untouchable. He thought I was weak, dependent, and desperate. He forgot that I was the same woman who built something from nothing once before, the same woman who put herself through school, the same woman who took a risk on a man with a dream and made that dream a reality. He mistook my love for weakness and my kindness for stupidity. That's his loss, literally. $320 million worth of loss. So that's how a man who thought I was nothing lost $320 million. Trevor learned the hard way that you can't build an empire on someone's back and expect them to stay silent forever. If this story taught you something, that knowing your worth isn't arrogant, it's essential, then hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Subscribe, because I've got more stories about people who learned expensive lessons about respect. Remember, never let anyone make you feel small, especially when you're the one holding them up. I'm living proof that the person they overlook today might be the one they answer to tomorrow. See you in the next one. They called me a gold digger, a leech. Security ripped my baby from my arms and threw us into the street like garbage. My mother-in-law smiled as I sobbed on the sidewalk. But what they didn't know? That morning, I'd become one of the richest women in America. Before we get into this story, if you love tales about karma serving justice on a silver platter, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you won't believe how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to the worst and best day of my life. My name is Bianca Thompson, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I grew up in foster care, 12 different homes before I aged out at 18. No family, no safety net, no one to call when life got hard. So when I met Christopher at a community center where I volunteered, and he looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, I thought maybe, just maybe, God was finally throwing me a bone. Christopher came from money, old money. The kind where your family name is on buildings and your mother's jewelry could feed a small country. The Thompson family owned half the real estate in our city, and their mansion looked like something out of a movie. But Christopher wasn't like them. He was kind. He volunteered at that community center every Saturday, teaching kids to read. He didn't care that I worked 2 jobs and lived in a studio apartment with furniture from thrift stores. He said he loved me for who I was. We got married 3 years ago. Small ceremony because his family refused to come. His mother, Linda, told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. His sister, Rachel, called me a gold digger to my face at our rehearsal dinner, but Christopher held my hand and promised me that their opinions didn't matter. He said we'd build our own family, our own life. And when our daughter Grace was born 6 months ago, I thought we finally had. But that morning, everything changed. I was feeding Grace her bottle when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end said his name was Harold Stevens, and he was a lawyer calling about my grandmother. I told him he had the wrong number because I'd never met my grandmother. I didn't know anything about my mother's family. The foster system didn't exactly come with a family tree, but Mr. Stevens said he'd been searching for me for 2 years. My grandmother's name was Lavinia Sinclair, and she'd spent the last decade of her life trying to find me. She'd hired investigators, searched records, never gave up. And 3 days ago, she passed away from a heart attack. She left me everything, her entire estate. When he told me the number, I thought it was a joke. $4.7 billion. Billion. With a B. I sat there in my tiny kitchen, with Grace in my arms, staring at nothing. This man was telling me I'd just inherited a fashion empire, real estate across 3 countries, investment portfolios, and enough money to change my life forever. My grandmother had built Lavinia Originals from nothing, just like I came from nothing. And she'd been looking for me because she wanted to give me everything she never got to share while she was alive. Mr. Stevens said he needed to meet with me to go over the details, but everything was legitimate. My grandmother's will was ironclad. I was her only living heir. I told him I needed a day to process this, and we scheduled a meeting for the following week. When I hung up, I just sat there crying. Not because of the money, but because somewhere out there, I'd had family, someone who wanted me, and I'd never gotten to meet her. I decided I'd tell Christopher that night. We had weekly dinner at his family's mansion every Thursday. I hated those dinners with everything in me, but Christopher said it was important to keep trying with his family. So I'd show up, let them insult me for 2 hours, and leave feeling smaller than when I arrived. But that night would be different. I'd tell Christopher about the inheritance. And maybe, just maybe, his family would finally see me as something other than the poor black girl who trapped their son. I showed up at the mansion at 6, right on time. Christopher was running late from work, so it was just me, Grace, Linda, and Rachel. The moment I walked through those doors, I felt the ice. Linda looked at me like I'd dragged dirt across her marble floors. Rachel smirked from the couch, already holding a glass of wine. I said hello, trying to be polite, and Linda just nodded toward the sitting room, like I was the help. Grace started fussing, so I was digging through my diaper bag for her pacifier when Linda's voice cut through the room like a knife. She said someone had stolen her diamond bracelet, the family heirloom, worth $50,000. And she was looking right at me when she said it. I froze. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. I'd never even seen her bracelet. But Rachel jumped up, all dramatic, saying we should check everyone's bags just to be sure. Before I could stop her, she grabbed my diaper bag and dumped everything onto the floor. Diapers, wipes, bottles, Grace's toys. And there, sitting on top of the pile, was a diamond bracelet. My heart stopped. I started shaking my head, saying that wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. Someone put it there. But Linda was already screaming at me, calling me a thief. Rachel stood there with her arms crossed, fake sympathy all over her face, saying she knew I'd do something like this eventually. I was holding Grace, who was screaming now because she could feel my panic, and I kept saying I didn't take it. I would never take it. This was a setup. Linda got in my face, so close I could smell her expensive perfume. And she said she'd known from day one what I was: a leech, a gold digger, trash from the streets, who'd tricked her son into marriage. She said I'd probably married Christopher just to steal from them, and now I'd been caught. Rachel added that I was an unfit mother, raising my baby in poverty while trying to rob them blind. The words kept coming, slicing into me, and I couldn't defend myself because Grace was crying so hard she could barely breathe. That's when Christopher walked in. I've never been so relieved to see someone in my life. I turned to him, tears streaming down my face, and begged him to tell them this was crazy. I didn't steal anything. He knew me. He knew I wasn't a thief. But Christopher just stood there, looking at his mother, then at the bracelet, then at me, and he said nothing. Linda kept pushing, telling him he needed to face the truth about who he'd married. Rachel showed him the bracelet, saying they'd found it in my bag. And I watched my husband, the man who promised to love and protect me, crumble under his mother's pressure. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor and said maybe we'd rushed into things. Maybe he didn't know me as well as he thought. Something broke inside me in that moment. This man had stood at an altar and promised to be my partner, my protector, my family. And when it mattered most, he chose them. Linda saw the look on my face and smiled. She pulled out her phone and called security, telling them to remove a thief from her property immediately. I started backing toward the door, telling them they didn't need to do this, I'd leave. But Linda wasn't satisfied with me just leaving. She wanted me humiliated. 2 security guards came in, big men in suits, and Linda pointed at me like I was dangerous. She told them to remove me from the estate and make sure I never came back. I begged Christopher one more time. I said his name, holding our screaming baby, and asked him to please stop this. He finally looked at me, and I saw shame in his eyes, but not enough shame to stand up to his mother. He turned away, and that's when the guards grabbed my arms. They weren't gentle. One of them tried to take Grace from me, and I held on to her so tight, screaming that they couldn't take my baby. The guard gave up and just dragged us both toward the door. Linda followed behind us, still yelling, calling me every name she could think of. Rachel had her phone out, filming the whole thing, laughing like this was the best entertainment she'd had in years. I was sobbing, Grace was screaming, and they pulled us through that massive house like we were nothing. When we got to the front gate, one of the guards literally pushed me. I stumbled and fell onto the sidewalk, scraping my knee through my jeans, trying to protect Grace from the impact. The iron gate slammed shut behind me with this final, terrible sound. I sat there on the curb, holding my baby, both of us crying, and looked up to see neighbors watching from their windows. It started to rain. Of course it started to rain. I don't know how long I sat there. 20 minutes maybe. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just held Grace and let the rain soak us both while she cried herself into exhausted hiccups. Finally, I called an Uber with shaking hands and went to my apartment. The little studio I'd kept just in case things didn't work out. Turned out my instincts had been right. The next 3 days were the darkest of my life. Christopher wouldn't answer my calls or texts. I later found out his family had convinced him to file for divorce immediately and fight for custody of Grace. They were using the theft accusation as proof that I was unstable and unfit. They had lawyers, family friends in the legal system, and all the money in the world to destroy me. And I had nothing. I felt powerless, alone, and completely defeated. But on the 4th day, something inside me shifted. I was staring at the documents Mr. Stevens had emailed me, proof of my inheritance, and something clicked. I'd spent my whole life being pushed around, told I wasn't good enough, treated like I didn't matter, and I'd accepted it because I thought that's just how the world worked when you came from nothing. But I wasn't nothing anymore. I had power now, real power, and it was time to use it. I called Mr. Stevens back and told him I was ready to meet. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room with him and 3 other lawyers, going through every detail of my inheritance. It was real, all of it. My grandmother's fashion empire, Lavinia Originals, was worth over $2 billion alone. She owned properties in New York, Paris, and London. She had investments in tech companies, pharmaceutical companies, and renewable energy. She sat on the boards of 5 major corporations. And now, all of it was mine. I hired the best divorce lawyer in the state that day. Then I hired a private investigator to prove the bracelet was planted. Within a week, we had security footage from Rachel's apartment building, showing her purchasing an identical bracelet online 3 days before the dinner. We had text messages between Rachel and Linda, planning the whole setup. They'd been so confident I could never fight back that they hadn't even been careful. But here's what they didn't know. One of the companies I'd just inherited was their biggest creditor. Thompson Real Estate was drowning in debt, and my company held the majority of their loans. I went to my first board meeting and learned that the Thompson family was 3 months away from bankruptcy. They'd been hiding it, keeping up appearances while their empire crumbled. And I now had the power to destroy them completely or save them. The choice was mine. 2 weeks after they'd thrown me into the street, the Thompson family held their annual charity gala. It was the social event of the season, with press coverage and every important name in the city attending. I received an invitation because I was technically still Christopher's wife. They probably sent it to humiliate me, expecting me not to show up. But I had other plans. I went shopping, real shopping. I bought a custom gown that cost more than Linda's car, hired a team for hair and makeup, and arranged for a Rolls-Royce to pick me up. When I walked into that gala with my lawyer and 2 security guards, the entire room went silent. Linda's face drained of all color. Rachel dropped her champagne glass, and it shattered on the marble floor. Christopher just stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Linda recovered first, marching toward me with rage in her eyes. She started to call for security, but my lawyer stepped forward with a folder full of documents. He announced loudly that Mrs. Thompson needed to be careful because I was now one of the event's major donors. I'd purchased a table for $100,000. The room erupted in whispers. Then, on the screens set up around the venue for the charity presentation, different footage started playing. Security footage from Rachel's apartment, her voice planning the setup with Linda, the proof that they'd framed me. I'd paid the venue manager very well to let my team control the screens for just 2 minutes. That's all I needed. People gasped. I heard someone say they'd always known Linda was cruel. Rachel looked like she might faint, but I wasn't done. I walked to the front of the room and took the microphone from the shocked event coordinator. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My voice was steady. I told them my name was Bianca Sinclair Thompson, and I was the sole heir to the Lavinia Sinclair estate. I watched recognition ripple through the crowd. Everyone knew that name. Everyone knew that fortune. I explained that I'd inherited $4.7 billion. The same morning the Thompson family had called me a thief and had me thrown into the street while holding my baby. Then I looked directly at Linda and said, I discovered something interesting about Thompson Real Estate. They were bankrupt, and the company that held most of their debt, mine. I was calling in those loans, effective immediately. The press in the room went wild, cameras flashing, phones recording. Linda grabbed a chair to steady herself. Christopher pushed through the crowd, trying to reach me. He was saying my name, saying he'd made a mistake, begging me to talk to him privately. He said he loved me, that he'd been weak, that he'd choose me this time. I looked at the man I'd loved, the man I'd thought was different, and I felt nothing but pity. I told him he'd had his chance to stand up for his wife and child. He'd chosen his mother instead. Our marriage was over. My lawyers had already filed everything, and given his family's financial instability and history of aggression toward me, I'd be getting full custody of Grace. Then I turned to Linda. I spoke clearly so everyone could hear. I said she'd called me a leech and told everyone I'd married for money. Turns out, I was worth 50 times more than her entire family. But the difference between us was that I would never treat another human being the way she treated me. I told her that karma hadn't brought me to that gala. My grandmother's love had. And that was something Linda would never understand because she didn't know how to love anyone, not even her own son. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, leaving chaos behind me. I heard Linda crying, heard Rachel trying to explain to people that this wasn't how it looked. But I didn't look back. I was done with all of them. 6 months have passed since that night. Grace and I are thriving in a beautiful home, with a garden where she takes her first steps. I'm running my grandmother's companies and learning everything about the empire she built. I started a foundation for foster children because I know what it's like to grow up feeling forgotten. Christopher sees Grace twice a month with supervised visitation. He works a regular job now and pays child support on time. Linda and Rachel lost everything. They had to sell the mansion and move into a small apartment. Last I heard, Linda refuses to leave the house because she can't face the people who saw her true colors. I think about that night on the sidewalk sometimes, sitting in the rain with my baby, feeling like the world had broken me. But the truth is, they didn't break me. They just revealed who they really were, and they gave me the push I needed to step into who I was always meant to be. My grandmother spent years looking for me because she knew I existed. She believed I was worth finding, and that belief, that love from someone I never got to meet, saved me. They thought they could destroy me because I came from nothing. But coming from nothing taught me strength they'll never understand. I didn't need their money, or their name, or their approval. I just needed to remember my own worth. And now I make sure every foster kid who walks through my foundation's doors knows their worth too. Because nobody should ever feel as small as they tried to make me feel. Never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. Your value isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself and how you rise when they try to keep you down. If this story reminded you that karma is real and your worth isn't defined by anyone else, smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have said to Linda at that gala. I read every single one. Subscribe so you never miss stories about justice being served. And remember, stay strong, stay blessed, and never let anyone dim your light. I'll see you in the next one. They decorated my dining room with pink balloons, set up a gift table in my foyer, had the audacity to serve champagne from my crystal. His pregnant mistress was throwing a baby shower in my house. And when I walked through that door, every single one of them was about to learn who really owned these keys. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Now before I tell you how I made a room full of women scatter like roaches when the lights come on, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because baby, you're gonna want to be here for every single story I tell. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Now let me take you back to where this whole mess started. Because you need to understand something. I didn't just lose my mind that day. I had been holding it together for far too long. My name is Diana, and 8 years ago, I met a man who I thought was everything I'd been praying for. We met at a charity gala, where I was the keynote speaker. I had just closed a major deal for my consulting firm, and I was riding high on success. I was 32, confident, financially independent, and honestly, I wasn't even looking for love. But there he was. Tall, handsome, successful in his own right. His name was Trevor, and he owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. The brother had money, charm, and he knew exactly what to say. He pursued me like I was the only woman in the world. Flowers at my office every week, surprise trips to wine country, handwritten notes telling me how much he admired my intelligence and drive. My girlfriends were jealous. My mama was cautious, though. She pulled me aside one day and said, "Baby, when a man seems too perfect, look closer. Nobody's that smooth without practice." But I was in love, and you know how it is when you're in love. You hear what you want to hear and ignore the rest. We got married after a year of dating. Beautiful ceremony, over 200 guests, and a honeymoon in the Maldives that felt like a dream. Those first few years were good. I'm not gonna lie. We both worked hard, traveled together, built our careers side by side. I was making just as much money as he was, sometimes more. When we bought that mansion, the one this whole story's about, I put down half. Actually, let me be clear, I put down 60% because my credit score was better and I had more liquid cash. That house was as much mine as it was his, legally and financially. Remember that part, because it matters. But somewhere around year 6, things started shifting. You know that feeling when something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That was us. Trevor started working later and later, more business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. He became protective of his phone in a way he'd never been before. He'd take calls in other rooms, angle his screen away from me when texting, keep his phone face down on the table during dinner. Little things that individually meant nothing, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. My best friend Candace told me to check his phone. She'd been through this with her ex-husband and recognized all the signs. But I had too much pride for that. I kept thinking, I'm not that woman. I'm not going to snoop and act insecure. Looking back now, I realized that wasn't pride. That was fear. I was afraid of what I'd find, so I convinced myself I was being mature by trusting him. But sweetheart, let me tell you something. Intuition isn't insecurity. When your gut is screaming at you, listen to it. Things came to a head one night when I was doing laundry. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a jewelry store. A receipt for a diamond bracelet that cost $8,000. A bracelet I'd never seen. It was dated from 2 weeks prior, right around Valentine's Day. Now he'd given me a nice gift, that Valentine's, perfume, and a dinner reservation, but no $8,000 bracelet. I sat on our bed with that receipt in my hand, and something inside me just broke open. That night, after he fell asleep, I did what I should have done months earlier. I picked up his phone. I knew his passcode because he'd never changed it, and I started reading. Y'all, I sat in that bathroom for 2 hours going through messages. Her name was Gabrielle, 26 years old. She worked as a marketing coordinator at one of his dealerships. They'd been seeing each other for over a year, more than a year. While I was planning our anniversary trip, while I was having Sunday dinners with his mama, while I was being a loyal wife, he was building a whole separate life. But the messages that broke me weren't the flirty ones, or even the explicit ones. It was the ones where he talked about me. She's always working. She doesn't pay attention to me anymore. You make me feel young again. Like our marriage falling apart was my fault. Like my success and dedication were somehow defects. And then I saw the message that made my blood run cold. Baby, I got the results back. We're having a girl. I can't wait to meet our daughter. I had to put my fist in my mouth to keep from screaming. This man had gotten another woman pregnant. Not just an affair, a whole baby on the way. I sat on that cold bathroom floor until the sun came up, and when he woke up, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, his phone, and a glass of wine, even though it was 7 in the morning. He tried everything. Tears, apologies, excuses. He said it was a mistake, that he loved me, that he'd end it immediately. He swore the baby didn't change anything about us, which was the stupidest thing he could have possibly said. A baby changes everything. I told him I wanted a divorce right there, but he begged for a chance to fix things. And here's where I made a choice that probably sounds crazy to some of y'all. I told him okay, but I wasn't really giving him a chance. I was buying myself time. See, I'm a strategic woman. I didn't get successful by being impulsive. I told him we'd try to work it out while I quietly called the best divorce attorney in the city. I documented everything. I made copies of those text messages. I started separating my finances. I moved money into accounts he didn't have access to. I was preparing for war while smiling at the dinner table. Some of y'all might think that's cold, but I call it smart. Never let someone know you're leaving until you've already got one foot out the door. Trevor promised he'd cut off all contact with Gabrielle. He said he'd support the child financially, but wouldn't be involved beyond that. He went to therapy with me. sent me flowers again, tried to romance me like the old days. And I played along, nodding and smiling, while my lawyer drafted paperwork and protected my assets. This went on for about 3 months. 3 months of me pretending to forgive while actually fortifying my exit strategy. Then came the day that changed everything. I was supposed to be in Atlanta for a consulting contract, gone for 4 days. But the client had an emergency and canceled our final day of meetings. Instead of staying in some hotel, I decided to come home early. I didn't call Trevor to tell him. I just packed my bag and drove home from the airport, looking forward to surprising him with his favorite dinner as part of my ongoing performance of the devoted wife trying to save her marriage. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. The weather was beautiful, sunny, clear skies, one of those perfect spring days. I pulled into our circular driveway and immediately noticed cars I didn't recognize. 4 or 5 expensive vehicles parked along the drive. My first thought was that maybe Trevor was having a business meeting at the house, though he'd never mentioned it. Then I looked at the cars more closely. These weren't business cars. These were luxury SUVs and sedans, the kind women drive to brunch and shopping trips. I could see movement through the front windows, flashes of pink and white. I sat in my car for a moment, confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then it hit me like a freight train. The pink, the multiple cars, the middle of a weekday. I grabbed my purse, got out of that car, and walked up to my own front door, with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I used my key and opened the door, and I want you to understand the scene I walked into. My foyer, my beautiful marble foyer that I'd spent weeks choosing the right stone for, was filled with pink and white balloons. There was a gift table set up against the wall, piled high with wrapped presents and gift bags with tissue paper spilling out. I could hear music playing, women's laughter coming from the living room and dining room. The smell of catered food hung in the air. I walked through my own house like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. In my living room, there were about 25 women, some sitting on my furniture, some standing in groups, chatting, all of them dressed nice like they were at a party. Because they were at a party, a baby shower, there were games set up on my coffee table. Those silly baby shower games with clipboards and pens. There was a dessert table with pink cupcakes and cookies shaped like baby bottles. Someone had hung a banner across my fireplace that said, "It's a girl," in glittery letters. And in the center of it all, sitting in my favorite armchair like it was a throne, was Gabrielle. She was wearing a form-fitting pink dress that showed off her very pregnant belly. She looked radiant, glowing, happy. Her hand rested on her stomach in that way pregnant women do, and she was laughing at something one of the other women had said. She looked comfortable. She looked like she belonged there, in my house, in my chair, at her baby shower, for a baby she made with my husband. It took them a minute to notice me. I was just standing there in the archway, between the foyer and the living room, my overnight bag still in my hand, staring at this scene that my brain couldn't quite process. Then one woman looked up, saw me, and her smile froze. She nudged the woman next to her. Then another woman noticed. The laughter started dying down, in waves, until the room was completely silent, except for the music still playing from a speaker somewhere. Gabrielle turned to see what everyone was staring at, and when her eyes met mine, I saw something flicker across her face. It wasn't shame, though. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was annoyance, like I was interrupting something. She actually smiled at me, this tight, fake smile, and said, "Oh, you must be Diana." We tried to keep the noise down. Trevor said you'd be gone until tomorrow. The audacity, the sheer, unbelievable audacity of this woman. She knew exactly who I was. She'd been sleeping with my husband for over a year. She was carrying his baby. And she had the nerve to throw a baby shower in my house and act like I was the one intruding. I saw red. But here's the thing about me. When I'm truly angry, I don't yell. I don't scream. I get very, very quiet and very, very calm. And that's the version of me that stepped fully into that living room. I set my bag down carefully, I looked around the room at every single face. Some of these women had the decency to look ashamed. Others just looked scared. A few looked like they wanted to disappear into the furniture. I took my time, letting the silence stretch out until it was uncomfortable. Then I spoke, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. "You have 5 minutes to get out of my house." Gabriel actually laughed. She laughed and said, "Actually, we're not done with the shower yet. We still have to do gifts," and I cut her off. "Let me be very clear. This is my house. My name is on the deed. My money bought this furniture you're sitting on, these floors you're standing on, and that crystal you're drinking champagne out of. You are in my home, celebrating a baby that was conceived while I was married to your baby's father. And you have now got 4 minutes to get yourself, and every single person here, out before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." One of the older women stood up immediately and grabbed her purse. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled to me. "I didn't know. I thought." She didn't finish. She just headed for the door. That started a chain reaction. Women began scrambling to gather their things. Purses were grabbed, half-eaten cupcakes abandoned, champagne glasses set down quickly on whatever surface was nearest. But Gabrielle wasn't moving. She just sat there, rubbing her belly, looking at me with this defiant expression. "Trevor invited me to use the house. He said it was fine." I walked closer to her, and I spoke quietly enough that only she could hear me over the sounds of her guests fleeing. "Trevor doesn't own this house. I do. And Trevor won't own much of anything by the time my lawyers are done with him. So you can sit there all you want, but in about 2 minutes, I'm going to physically remove you. And I promise you that won't be good for you or that baby. Your choice." Something in my eyes must have told her I meant it. She struggled to get out of that deep armchair. Pregnancy made it difficult, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered her text messages to my husband. I remembered her laughing about how I was always working and didn't appreciate him. I remembered that she knew he was married and didn't care. That tiny flicker of sympathy died real quick. She grabbed her purse and waddled toward the door, trying to maintain some dignity. At the doorway, she turned back and said, "He loves me, you know. He's going to choose me." And I said something I'll never forget saying, because it felt so powerful in that moment. I said, "Honey, you can have him. A man who cheats with you will cheat on you. But good luck supporting a baby on a marketing coordinator's salary, because that prenup he signed means he's about to be a whole lot less rich." I watched her walk out. I watched all of them walk out. 20-some women carrying gift bags and purses, climbing into their luxury cars, and driving away from my property. I stood in my doorway until the last car disappeared down the street. Then I closed and locked the door, turned around, and looked at my house. Pink balloons were everywhere. Half-eaten food on plates, champagne glasses with lipstick stains, wrapping paper and ribbons scattered around, that stupid banner still hanging over my fireplace. And I left it exactly like that. I didn't touch a single thing. I took out my phone and photographed everything, every angle, every detail. Then I called my lawyer and told her what happened. She told me the photos were perfect evidence of adultery and disrespect of marital property. Then I sat down on my couch in the middle of that baby shower disaster and waited for Trevor to come home. He walked in around 7 that evening. I heard his key in the door, heard him calling my name cheerfully because he thought I was still in Atlanta. Then I heard his footsteps stop. I heard him say, "Oh my God." And then he rushed into the living room and saw me sitting there, calm as could be, in the middle of the wreckage of his mistress's baby shower. His face went white, then red, then white again. He started stammering out explanations that didn't make sense. I didn't know she was going to, and this wasn't supposed to, and I can explain. But I held up my hand, and he stopped talking. "I want you to pack a bag and leave. Tonight. My lawyer will be in touch with you tomorrow. The divorce papers are already drawn up. You can move in with Gabrielle and your new baby, or you can get your own place. I don't care, but you're not staying here." He tried to apologize. He actually got down on his knees and started crying, telling me he'd made a terrible mistake, that he loved me, that we could still fix this. And I looked at this man I'd spent 8 years of my life with and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, just nothing. And that's when I knew I was really done. I stood up, stepped around him, and went upstairs to our bedroom. I locked the door and called Candace to come stay with me. When I came back down an hour later, Trevor was gone. He'd packed a bag and left, and I haven't lived with him since. The divorce took 4 months. My lawyer was brilliant. Because I documented everything, and because my name was on most of our major assets, I kept the house, half of his business holdings, and a generous settlement. Trevor tried to fight it at first, but when my lawyer showed the judge photos of his mistress's baby shower in our marital home, the judge was not sympathetic to him. Trevor ended up having to sell one of his dealerships to pay me out. Last I heard, Gabriel had the baby, a little girl. Trevor's supporting them financially, but apparently, things aren't exactly romantic between them anymore. Turns out, when you're dealing with dirty diapers and 2 a.m. feedings and an actual relationship instead of secret hotel rooms and exciting affairs, things get real very quickly. She posts on social media sometimes, and he's rarely in the pictures. I don't follow her, but you know how friends of friends send you things. From what I can tell, he's stressed, struggling to manage supporting 2 households. And the dealerships aren't doing as well since the divorce hit his reputation in our community. As for me, I'm thriving. My business has grown by 40%. I bought a beautiful condo downtown that's all mine, decorated exactly how I want it. I've traveled to 5 countries in the past year. I've gone on dates with interesting men who treat me with respect. And most importantly, I have peace. Real peace. The kind of peace you can only get when you're not wondering where your husband is, or who he's with, or if he's lying to you. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled it, throwing everyone out, being so cold and calculated. And my answer is always no, not for a single second. Could I have screamed and cried and made a scene? Sure, but that wouldn't have been strategic. That wouldn't have protected my interests or my dignity. I chose to handle it with the same intelligence and planning I use in my business, and it worked out in my favor. Here's what I learned from all of this, and I want y'all to really hear me. Trust your intuition. When something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore red flags because you're in love, or because you're comfortable, or because you're afraid of being alone. Know your worth, and more importantly, know your legal rights. Protect your assets from day one. If I hadn't kept my finances somewhat separate, if my name wasn't on that deed, the divorce could have been much messier. Stand up for yourself with grace and power. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the most powerful one. And finally, understand that you can be hurt and still be strategic. You can be heartbroken and still be smart. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. That day, when I walked into my house and saw that baby shower, something inside me shifted permanently. I could have fallen apart. I could have let them make me feel small in my own home. Instead, I remembered who I was, a successful, intelligent, capable woman who didn't need a man to define her or a marriage to complete her. And I took my house back. I took my life back. I took my power back. So that's how I threw a pregnant mistress and her entire baby shower out of my own mansion. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have handled it differently? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if this story spoke to you, if it gave you that little bit of courage you needed to stand up for yourself in your own situation, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We all know somebody who's making themselves small for someone who doesn't deserve them. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I've got plenty more stories about taking my power back, choosing myself, and building a life I actually want to live. The next video is going to be about how I rebuilt my social circle after the divorce. Because let me tell you, you find out who your real friends are when your marriage falls apart. That's a whole other story. Remember this, you are never trapped. You always have options, even when it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. You just gotta open the door and let it leave. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small in your own house, whether that's a physical house or the life you've built for yourself. You deserve respect, loyalty, and love. Don't settle for anything less. I'm Diana, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay smart, and remember, the best revenge is living well. Peace.